MSI's GS77 is a thinner, stealthy, all-black gaming laptop, kinda like a cheaper version of the Razer Blade. So should you save some money and buy it, or is it worth spending more for a Razer Blade? My GS77 has Intel's Core i9-12900H CPU, Nvidia RTX 3080 Ti graphics, 64 gigs of DDR5 memory, and a 17.3-inch 4K 120Hz screen. But there are also lower spec configurations for less money too, and you can check out some examples with those links below the video. The GS77 is available in MSI's sandblasted core black finish. The lid, interior, and bottom panels are all CNC aluminum, and there aren't any sharp corners or edges. Build quality feels nice enough, but it can't compete with Razer's Blade lineup that I just finished testing. Granted, those cost more too. The black finish is a massive fingerprint magnet anywhere you lightly touch, but I found it fairly easy to clean with a microfiber cloth. The front has an indent in the middle, which makes it easy to open the lid. However, unlike the smaller GS66, which goes back the full 180 degrees, the 77's goes back about 130 degrees. It still has the shortcut to flip the screen for sharing, which feels out of place given this year's GS66 doesn't have it. Seems like MSI has them backwards. There's some flex to the metal lid, but it's not too bad considering the new hinge design, which has the hinges closer to the middle. Only time will tell how well these hold up. They felt fairly sturdy when moving the lid, but we can see during the opening action the bottom part appears to flex up a little. MSI's product page says they're reinforced. Keyboard flex was fairly minor, even when pushing down hard, a welcome improvement compared to last year's GS76, which wasn't as solid. The laptop alone weighs 2.9 kilos or 6.5 pounds, and that's before we include the 240-watt power brick and cables for charging. Sure, it's not super thick, but it's still going to take up some space at almost an inch deeper compared to others like, say, Razer's Blade 17. The GS77 does not have a MUX Switch, which means no G-Sync. But like all Intel 12th gen gaming laptops with Optimus, it has adaptive sync with a range of 48 to 120Hz. The 17.3-inch screen has 1080p, 1440p, and 4K options, and MSI has sent over the 4K 120Hz configuration. Honestly, for most people at this larger 17-inch size, but with lower GPU power limits due to the thinner laptop chassis, a 1440p high refresh screen option would be a better sweet spot. My 8-bit screen has decent color gamut, but lower contrast than expected. I generally find 4K panels to have better color gamut, so it could be a good option for someone that does a mixture of gaming and content creation. It gets fairly bright too, up to 453 nits at full brightness. Not bad at all, considering the 60% brightness point is higher than this year's Asus TUF A15 at maximum. We're looking at an 8.1 millisecond average gray-to-gray response time, which is below the 8.33 milliseconds needed for transitions to occur within the refresh window, though as we can see, some were higher than this. There aren't any panel overdrive modes available with the 4K 120Hz screen, so no overshoot or undershoot. There are definitely faster panels out there, like the 4K 144Hz screen in the Razer Blade. The exact same panel in the GS77 was used in last year's Asus Zephyrus S17, but that one has an overdrive mode which dropped it down to 5.3 milliseconds. MSI laptops usually offer an overdrive mode, so I'm not sure why they didn't include it with the GS77, as that could speed it up. A lower screen response time contributes to lower system latency. This is the total amount of time between a mouse click and when a gunshot fires on the screen in CSGO, and the GS77 was again lower compared to those other 4K high refresh options, which may in part be due to the lack of MUX Switch, as going via the integrated graphics typically slows this. Backlight bleed was extremely minor. I never noticed any problems during normal use, but this will vary between laptops. There's a 1080p camera above the screen in the middle, and it has IR for Windows Hello Face Unlock. This is what the camera and microphone look and sound like, and this is what it sounds like while I'm typing on the keyboard. So most of the time it is fine, but if I get a bit more aggressive with it, the screen does wobble a little bit. But it's fairly sturdy for the most part. The GS77 has a per-key RGB backlit keyboard, and all keys and secondary functions get lit up, though I didn't think it got particularly bright. You can press the F8 key, the one with the keyboard icon, to cycle between 4 brightness levels from high to low. You can also hold function and can press either plus or minus to change the lighting up or down, but strangely, the plus lowers brightness while the minus increases it, which is the opposite that I'd expect. Typing was alright, though the key presses felt a little shallow to me and the small right shift might annoy some. Although the power button is part of the keyboard, an accidental press doesn't do anything. You need to hold it down for a long time before Windows prompts you to shut down. Despite there being space on the left and right of the keyboard, the numpad feels squashed in. I mean, it's a 17-inch laptop, we can see there's space. It just doesn't feel well utilized. Take the front-facing speakers for instance. They're right down the front on the left and right corners. During normal use, your hands don't cover them, but it can happen. Having the speakers on the sides of the keyboard like Razer's Blade series would have solved this. Although the speakers are close to where your hands rest, palm rest vibration was surprisingly minimal, even at high volume levels. The speakers sound above average for a gaming laptop, but aren't amazing. There's some bass, and they're fairly clear still at higher volume. Not only do I think the speakers on the Blade 17 sound better, but the cutout holes on the GS77 are larger too, which means it's easier for dirt to find its way inside. The Latencymon results weren't looking very good at all. The large touchpad is smooth to the touch and works well. However, MSI have chosen to center it to the laptop chassis, presumably for aesthetics. Normally, the touchpad is centered with regards to the letter keys. So the way they have it here, my right hand rests on the touchpad when I type. The palm rejection was good, so this was never an issue for me while typing. It didn't trigger any key presses, but it's hard to say if this will be everyone's experience. It just feels a little weird and took some getting used to. There's also a fingerprint scanner to the right of the touchpad which I found to work accurately. The left side has an air exhaust vent, two USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A ports, a 3.5mm audio combo jack, and a switch to disconnect the camera. The right has a full-sized SD Express card slot, two USB Type-C ports, only the rear one supports Thunderbolt 4, and there's an air exhaust on this side too. The rest is on the back, in between a couple more air exhaust vents near the corners from left to right. We've got the power input, HDMI output, and a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port facing the preferred way so you don't have to lift the machine to unplug. The HDMI version isn't listed on the spec sheet for some reason, but we did confirm that it does support an external screen at up to 4K 120Hz 8-bit with G-Sync, so variable refresh rate support. Now by default, that HDMI port on the back and the Type-C port on the right closest to the front connect directly to the NVIDIA graphics, bypassing Optimus. So this means connecting an external monitor to either of those ports should offer a speed boost in games. The other Type-C port, which is closer to the back, is the Thunderbolt 4 port, and that connects via the Intel integrated graphics. MSI's spec sheet does note that this laptop should support charging over USB Type-C. However, I wasn't able to get it charging at all while it was running with either of the two Type-C ports when connecting the Razer Core X Chroma eGPU enclosure. It seems like a missed opportunity not to have rear port icons. There's space on this section that sticks out behind the screen, and this would have made it easier to see where you're plugging in without turning the machine around, like the Legion 7. There are 13 Phillips head screws to get inside. The 4 at the back are shorter than the rest, so keep track of them, while the 3 in the middle don't come out of the panel. I was able to open it easily enough using the pry tools linked below the video and starting at the back of the laptop and working my way around. Once I opened it, the camera disconnect switch fell right off. I've had this happen with another MSI laptop in the past. It just doesn't seem to be designed very well compared to others like Lenovo's Legion series. If I hadn't actually noticed it come off, I could have easily lost it when I put it back together. Inside, we've got the battery down the front, two M.2 storage slots above it towards the right, two memory slots in the center, and the Wi-Fi 6E card on the far left. I also want to note the memory that came in my GS77 because it's good stuff. This is the first time I've had dual rank DDR5 memory, and as you'll see later, it seems to be offering a performance boost in some tasks. I'm not sure if you only get dual rank with the 64GB configuration though. Wi-Fi performance was decent. Killer or Intel options generally seem to do better compared to Realtek or MediaTek options in my testing. Though interestingly, last year's older GS76 did a little better. The upgradeability score would have been a 6 like the smaller GS GS66, but I took off half a point from ease of access due to the camera disconnect switch popping out. It seems to be loose by design, but I can't work out why, and it's difficult to get back in the right spot. Apart from that, it's fairly easy to open, the motherboard isn't flipped like previous MSI Stealth models, and we've got good upgrade options. The GS77 is powered by a 4-cell 99.9 watt-hour battery, the biggest size legally allowed on a plane. By default, the MSI Center software has Display Power Saver enabled. This will automatically lower the screen's refresh rate down to 60 Hz when you unplug the charger, as this helps extend the battery life. This is why the screen flashes black when you disconnect it from the power, and then it automatically changes back to the higher refresh rate when you reconnect it. I might just be nitpicking a bit here, but Asus gaming laptops have that same feature, and when you unplug, a little thing comes up on the screen to let you know which refresh rate it's running at, so it's obvious what just happened. If you're unaware of this feature and you just unplug the charger and the screen goes black, you might be wondering what's going on. So I think it would be good if MSI had something similar, but at the same time, at least they are giving us the option to do this automatically when we unplug. Because other laptops like Razer and Lenovo, for instance, make you press the Function plus R shortcut, so it's manual rather than being automatic. Which is a shame because running at a lower refresh rate does increase battery. And I think most people probably don't need a high refresh rate display when they're running on battery power. If you're gaming, you're probably not going to be hitting high FPS anyway. Anyway, the battery life wasn't too bad for an Intel-based laptop. The top of the graph is dominated by AMD machines, and there are other Intel 12th gen machines with similar sized batteries that were ahead of it, but there are also some behind too. This year's GS77 lasted 13% longer compared to last year's GS76 with the same sized battery. Let's check out thermals next. There are a couple of heat pipes shared between the CPU and GPU. Cool air comes in underneath, and there are plenty of holes for airflow directly above the intake fans. Hot air then gets exhausted out of both sides and out the back vents. The MSI Center software lets us change between different performance modes, which from lowest to highest are silent, balanced, and extreme performance. Extreme performance mode optionally lets you overclock the GPU. The first time you go in here, there's no GPU overclock applied, but if you click default, it boosts the GPU core by 100 MHz. So not really a good default if you have to manually go and click the default button first. Extreme mode also lets you enable cooler boost, which sets the fans to maximum, but you can also go to advanced mode to customize either fan individually. The temperatures were fine at idle, but the fan noise was annoying. More on that in a bit. The rest of the results are from combined CPU and GPU stress tests, which aim to represent a worst case full load scenario. Most applications don't fully load both the CPU and GPU at the same time like this. The differences between silent, balanced, and extreme modes were fairly small in terms of temperatures. If we boost the fans in extreme mode though, interestingly the GPU temperature lowers, but the CPU temperature actually increases. The cooling pad I test with, linked below the video, increases this gap even further. These are the clock speeds for the same tests just shown. Although the temperatures in silent, balanced, and extreme modes were similar, we are seeing increased performance as we step up through the higher modes, just at the expense of louder fans. Remember in extreme mode with the fans maxed out and with the cooling pad the CPU got warmer, but the GPU got cooler? Well, this resulted in higher performance in both cases. We can see why when looking at the power levels being reached. Although the CPU was reaching 84 degrees Celsius in extreme mode with the fans maxed out, it was actually bouncing between 50 and 90 watts. It just averaged the 60 I'm reporting here long term. It seemed to keep boosting up until it hit thermal throttling and would then dip back and repeat every few minutes. When we add the cooling pad, the CPU power can sustain a higher limit without bouncing up and down, which is why it increases to a higher 77 watt average. This is very high for a combined CPU plus GPU workload, and it seems that it's only possible by sacrificing GPU power. Although the RTX 3080 Ti can run up to 105 watts with Nvidia's dynamic boost, with the CPU also loaded up, we can see that it can lower to 75 watts as the CPU gets prioritized. With extreme mode and the fans on auto, the GPU was closer to 80 watts. Considering that my GS77 has the 4K screen, I'd want it to prioritize the GPU in games over the CPU. Maybe for the lower 1080p 360Hz option, it makes more sense to prioritize CPU power. But at higher resolutions, generally speaking, having the power get directed to the GPU would probably be more beneficial. But that said, it does of course entirely depend on the game and how CPU heavy it is. In a CPU-only workload like Cinebench, the processor ran up to the point it was thermal throttling, which is why I've listed approximate power levels. PL1 was 100 watts, and it would start out like this initially until it got too hot, so performance could improve here with better cooling. It's not as simple as just saying thermal throttle bad, because MSI could have chosen to cap the power limit lower at the expense of lower performance. It's a trade-off. There are a number of laptops that are able to outperform the GS77 with similar core and thread counts, including the smaller GS66 with the same CPU which was around 800 points higher. Sure, the GS77 was thermal throttling here due to high power limits, but you'd think the GS77 being larger would have superior cooling. The performance drops back when we unplug the charger and instead run purely off of battery power. However, the GS77 is now the second best result we've got in terms of multi-core performance, but the highest when it comes to single core on battery power. This looks great at first glance, but an 8-core 16-thread AMD laptop from last year is still able to do better on battery in multi-core, even though the GS77 has that 14-core 20-thread CPU. The keyboard was sitting in the low 30°C range in the middle when just sitting there idle, normal stuff. It gets warmer with the stress tests going, and it's starting to get hot towards the middle. Not too surprising considering the quieter fans though. Stepping up to balanced mode, and it's much the same. The fans are a bit louder to compensate for the higher power limits. Extreme mode with the fans on auto was fairly similar. The palm rest always felt warm as the metal chassis conducts heat. With the fan maxed out, it gets notably cooler. But of course, this comes at the expense of louder fans. Let's have a listen. When just sitting there doing nothing at all, the fans would suddenly ramp up and down constantly, which was very annoying. Otherwise, balanced and silent modes were relatively quiet even with the stress tests going. Extreme mode with the fans on automatic speed was quieter compared to most gaming laptops I test in this workload on the highest mode, while max fans, as you'd expect, were quite loud. Alright, now let's actually see how well MSI's GS77 actually performs in games and compares against other laptops. Cyberpunk 2077 was tested the same on all laptops, and I've got the GS77 shown by the red highlight. Now, don't get me wrong, it's running the game perfectly fine at high settings, but at just 3 FPS ahead of MSI's own smaller 15-inch GS66 with a lower tier 3070 Ti, it really makes you wonder if it's worth spending more on the 3080 Ti in a thinner laptop like this. Though to be fair, the GS66 does have a MUX Switch, while the GS77 does not. We've got a different selection of laptops at the higher 1440p resolution, as we only test machines that actually have a chance of running it. The GS77 was very close to other lower wattage 3080 Ti laptops like Razer's Blade 15 and Gigabyte's Aero 16. Again, not quite as good compared to alternatives with higher GPU power limits, though to be fair, those are also thicker machines. Control is a fairly GPU heavy game, so the lack of MUX Switch probably doesn't matter much here either. I found it interesting that the GS77 was nearly 5% faster than Razer's Blade 15 with the same CPU and GPU, despite the fact that the Blade does have a MUX Switch and a higher GPU power limit. The GS77 is the first gaming laptop with dual-rank DDR5 memory I've seen so far though, so this could be giving it an edge. The results are a bit closer together at the higher 1440p resolution, but still the GS77 was coming out ahead of the Blade, at least in terms of average FPS. That's the smaller 15-inch Blade though. Comparing with the Blade 17 is probably a fairer comparison in terms of laptop size, but Razer are giving that a much higher power limit so it's able to reach a 20% higher average frame rate, despite actually being smaller than the GS77 in every dimension. Red Dead Redemption 2 was tested with the game's benchmark. There are quite a few laptops reaching similar average frame rates here. However, I've found that that AMD's Radeon GPUs typically do better than Nvidia in this test. This would explain why the RX 6700M in MSI's Delta 15 from last year was reaching about the same average FPS as the 3080 Ti in the GS77. At 1440p, the GS77 was basically performing the same as the smaller GS66 with a lower tier 3070 Ti GPU at a similar power limit. So yeah, another example showing that the 3080 Ti might not necessarily be worth spending more money for in some workloads. The full review of that GS66 is coming soon, so make sure you're subscribed. Here are the 3D Mark results for those that find them useful. Now for some content creator tests. Adobe Premiere was tested with the Puget Systems benchmark, and MSI's GS77 has broken the record for best result here. Again, like some of the games, I suspect that the dual-rank DDR5 memory is helping it out here. The tendency to favor CPU power limit over GPU could also be a factor. The GS77 was also scoring the highest ever in Adobe Photoshop. This test relies on single-threaded CPU performance, which is why Intel i9 laptops dominate the top of the graph. But again, I think it's that good memory that gives MSI the additional boost. DaVinci Resolve still cares about CPU and memory performance, but the GPU matters more, which is why the GS77 is now being beaten by a few high wattage 3080 Ti laptops. We've also tested SpecView Perf, which tests out various professional 3D workloads. Intel 12th Gen supports faster PCIe Gen 4 storage, and both the read and write speeds here are excellent. The speeds from the SD card slot were decent, but not amazing. The card sticks out quite a bit when inserted into the machine, so be careful not to bump it. Just like pretty much every other MSI gaming laptop, you've got the option of pressing this epic cheat code to unlock the advanced BIOS. This is a tweaker's dream. You can change pretty much anything here from power to thermal limits and way more. Just make sure you know what you're doing or you risk bricking the machine. Linux support was tested with Ubuntu 22.04. By default out of the box, the keyboard, touchpad, speakers, Ethernet, and camera all worked. The keyboard shortcuts for screen brightness, volume adjustment, and keyboard brightness adjustment all worked too. As is usually the case with Ubuntu, Wi-Fi didn't work out of the box despite this latest version coming with kernel version 5.15. Let's discuss pricing and availability next. This will of course change over time, so refer to those links below the video for updates. At the time of recording, the only GS77 with RTX 3080 Ti I could find goes for $3,600 US. But that's with half the RAM, half the storage, an i7 processor, and 1440p screen. So expect the exact version I've tested in this video to be even more. The lowest price I've found is $2,600 US for the 3070 Ti configuration. The only difference seems to be the GPU, and I can tell you for sure, I wouldn't be spending $1,000 to jump up to the 3080 Ti. If a thinner, stealthy, blacked out gaming laptop is the goal, and you are after the top end configuration, honestly, I think it makes sense just to spend $400 more at that point to go for the Razer Blade 17. After testing out both at the maximum spec, I really think it does make sense just to pay the 10% extra money to get the Blade over the GS77. The Blade is lighter, smaller in all dimensions, yet also performs better. It's got a MUX Switch, it's got a faster screen, better keyboard, better touchpad, better speakers. I could go on. Of course, it's not a silver bullet though. The GS77 does have better battery life and performance on battery. And well, fact is, not everyone is rich and can afford a Razer Blade. Lower spec versions of the GS77 do offer far better value compared to the Blade. For example, Razer's Blade 17 with RTX 3060 starts at $100 more than a GS77 with a 3070 Ti. Though again, even the 3070 Ti configuration of the GS77 is limited to a 105 watt power limit, even though, technically speaking, this is a bigger laptop compared to the Razer Blade 17. The most annoying thing to me was that the GS77 would just have its fans randomly kick in. Now, it would happen all the time when I had the laptop plugged into power. It hasn't actually been happening while I've been sitting here recording this video, so I'm guessing it might not actually be a problem when running on battery power. But yeah, I can assure you it was happening all the time when plugged in, even when it was just sitting there doing nothing. It's also kind of strange that the GS77 doesn't have a MUX switch, yet the smaller GS76 does. But yeah, all things considered, if a thinner, stealthy, black gaming laptop is the goal and you can't afford a Razer Blade, the GS77 is worth a look at. There aren't exactly a whole lot of other options when it comes to gaming laptops that are stealthy, black and thin. Just be aware of the issues that I have noted throughout this video. Now, although RTX 3080 Ti graphics generally aren't worth it, especially at the lower power limits in a thinner design like the GS77, the fact is, it can still handle games quite well even at the higher 4K resolution of this screen. And you can find out what level of performance to expect in this video over here next. Otherwise, make sure you're subscribed to the channel for my upcoming full review on MSI's smaller GS66. It's basically the 15-inch version of this laptop, but there are a number of other differences.